Our next speaker is Gregory Stone from Conservation International.
The ocean is telling us things today. And I think the ocean is telling us that it actually doesn't need us. The ocean is telling us that we need it. We better stop abusing it. It's going to be here in the future. It may be in a slightly different state or a dramatically different state, but it's not going to go away. Our condition is far more vulnerable. The ocean holds all the cards. My name is Greg Stone, and I'm an oceanographer, marine biologist. I study the ocean, and I work every day to save it. I grew up in the outskirts of Boston. I actually didn't live near the ocean, but I was connected to the ocean through TV. I watched Jacques Cousteau documentaries as a kid. And I used to sit there on the living room floor with my mask and flippers on, watching these shows. I used to count the days between Jacques Cousteau documentaries. Finally, I got to the ocean when I was about 7 or 8 years old for the first time, and got to dive into the ocean. I remember I was with my cousin, and he lived near the ocean, and he had 2 flippers and 2 masks, so we each had 1 flipper and a mask. To this day, I remember the colors of the starfish, the bracing, wonderful feeling of being in salt water, the waving fronds of kelp. And I was totally lost and in love with the ocean from that moment forward. Okay, are there any questions? No. Thank you, everybody. And Chip, thank you very much for the invitation to be here today and to participate in this really important, informed, fun, and engaged conversation, because this is how we humans have gotten by and how we've created new knowledge ever since we sat around campfires in Africa 200,000 years ago, or ever since we sat along the side of the ocean 200,000 years ago, and I'm going to get to that shortly. It's always a privilege to come to a meeting like this and also to be positioned a couple of days into the meeting, because I get a chance to get a sense of the group, get a sense of the pulse, and I can kind of guide my remarks in that way. In that spirit, I may skip over a few slides that I know have been covered elsewhere, especially by Carl's talk yesterday about the threats to the ocean, so I'm not going to talk much about the threats. Instead, I'd like to talk about our history with the ocean and also the need and perhaps the direction that we need to go in order for the modern world and humans to coexist while maintaining the natural conditions on our planet. To me, that's really the challenge of our time, is how do we live and maintain our existence, and how does the ocean maintain us, and how do we maintain the ocean? The name of my talk is Ocean Renaissance, and the meaning of that will become clearer as we move into this. I'm an oceanographer. That's a clip from a documentary that was made on me a couple of years ago. But I'm an oceanographer and have spent my life diving in the ocean, over 10,000 scuba dives, in every ocean on the planet, including expeditions to Antarctica, where I felt the real pulse of the ocean. That's probably the place I felt closest to really what happens in the ocean, where you can almost see the phytoplankton, where you can certainly smell the phytoplankton. You've got the Antarctic circumpolar current spinning around the Antarctic continent, which really is like the artery or the heart of the Earth. We ventured down there. I've been there on three expeditions to study melting ice, which is one of the big problems we have today with climate change. Is on both poles we have these thermostats essentially that are now melting at really fast rates. And someone mentioned earlier, I think it was Jeffrey, about the possibility of sea level rising up to a few meters. It actually could rise up to 15 or 20 meters within the next 50 to maybe 75 years if the melting rates increase and if they accelerate, and especially if the West Antarctic ice sheet were to suddenly slide into the ocean. And I'll say this, every prediction that we scientists have made about climate change has been conservative. Every year we're finding that the temperature projections we make, the sea level rise projections we make are less than actually what happens. Another part of my background and my passion is studying seamounts. There are more mountains in the ocean than there are on land, and this is from a National Geographic article I wrote about a few years ago. And these seamounts are incredibly important features on our planet. They interrupt. Most currents in the ocean move horizontally, and when they hit a seamount, they actually are able to push the water up to the surface and create these amazing mixing conditions. I was diving on some seamounts in Hawaii about 6 months ago, and we went down into the caldera of Luihi, which is the hotspot volcano off Hawaii. It's right off the Big Island, and it's an active volcano. It's a bit quiescent at the moment, and it looks like the sea surface at the bottom of that slide looks. It's hot, there's shimmering water coming out, and we sat there, and this Pacific sleeper shark came up to the submarine. This is a deep sea shark. You don't find them in shallow waters. And I had seen them once before, and it did exactly the same thing. She came over to the sub like that, and then she came right up to the porthole and looked right in at me. And then she laid alongside the submarine. She's about 15 feet long. She's a good-sized shark. And stayed there for about a minute or two, then left. And now that I've got a sample size of 2, I think I know what they're doing. They have a brain about the size of a pack of cigarettes, so there's not a lot going on up there. And I think that, I'm sure this is the first submarine she ever saw. And she probably had to work out in her head, well, what can I do with it? You know, can I eat it? Can I mate with it? And it took her about 2 minutes to figure out neither one of those options were viable. And then she went off. So that was just a little recent experience in the ocean that I've had. But back to this is like a minute of lecture time here before we get into the guts of my presentation. This is a diagram of a seamount they published in National Geographic, and you can see the swirling currents and the life that lives on these features. And this is something that I doubt many people in this room had heard of prior to today. Certainly the general public hasn't heard, but this is a fundamental systemic part of the ocean system, and yet we know of so little about it. We know more about, there's a famous quote that we know more about the surface of Venus and Mars than we do about the seafloor of our own planet, and that's certainly true. Some of these seamounts we only know exist because of gravity anomalies that occur over them. But this is how you get down into one of these seamounts, a small submersible. There's a sphere there that holds 3 people. And by the way, we're going back in August, late August, if any of you are interested in diving down to a seamount in one of these submarines, let me know. And it was diving in submarines that really fundamentally changed my view of the ocean. In the 1990s, I was diving in the Sea of Japan, and we got down to 18,000 feet, a place that had not seen the light of day for literally billions of years, and we were the first people to arrive there. And when we got to the bottom, it was covered in trash and garbage, which doesn't seem to want to hold on the screen there. Sorry about that. But it woke me up. It said, hey, here we are arriving at a place that should not have anything. It should just be a pristine place. But we had already spoiled it prior to me arriving there 18,000 feet down in a submarine. And that's when my life began to take a different path. And I started to turn my research and my writing and all the work that I did towards balancing this relationship that's out of balance with the ocean. And this is, I love this slide. It shows the planet and that we are mostly water. And those arrows are currents, and you see the Gulf Stream is an exquisite oceanographic feature that comes up from the tropics and carries heat to Europe, making Europe a really nice place to live. Without the Gulf Stream transporting that heat north, England would be like Alaska, and Norway, where Jeffrey Sachs was the other day, would be like Antarctica. It's a fundamental driver, fundamental condition for the advancement of human civilization over the last 50,000 years or so. And that Gulf Stream is at risk. It's slowed down 30% already in the last 50 years or so. And if that were to slow down or be interrupted completely, Europe's climate would turn into something that you wouldn't want to think about. So in total, the oceans are what make the Earth a nice place to live. It's our life support system. And we've gone over the benefits that the ocean provides us. If you're wondering what the Earth would be like without an ocean, we've got plenty of examples in our own solar system. Just look around you. So the oceans are key, and it's always puzzled me why, when Buckminster Fuller saw this image and he coined the metaphor spaceship Earth back in the 1960s, why didn't we wake up to the fact that we had to pay attention to the ocean? We kind of got distracted by space. You know, when Kennedy made that optimistic remark that was talked about earlier, the world, and especially the United States, looked upward. What's lost to history, though, is that Kennedy also described the 1960s as the decade of the oceans. But that little detail has been lost to us. But we passed up that opportunity. And then some years later, astronaut and engineer Bill Anders snapped this photograph out the rearview mirror of the Apollo command module, and it's called Earthrise. And again, we see the Earth, and it's mostly blue. And again, the Earth really population really didn't like say, hey, it's blue, we need to live here, what should we do about it? And then finally, when the Voyager spacecraft was about to leave our solar system, Carl Sagan requested that they turn the camera backwards, and they photographed Earth one last time, and it's one pixel in that camera, and guess what? It's blue. So we've had plenty of evidence, plenty of opportunities, and this is a scale representation of how much water there is on the planet in terms of ocean. There's not much when you look at the volume of the Earth as a whole, yet that little bubble of salt water is really what makes this place agreeable to us. And this is what the ocean is mostly full of. It always strikes me that if an alien did come to Earth and wanted to meet the Earthlings, he would go to the ocean, or she would go to the ocean, because that's where most of the life is. That's where most of the biomass on the Earth is. Fully 80% of all the biomass on the Earth is in the ocean. And it's creatures like this holothurian, it's a pelagic sea cucumber, or this worm, a new species that I discovered with some colleagues deep, 10,000 feet off the coast of Indonesia, or this lobate ctenophore star jellyfish that I like to call the Darth Vader jellyfish. These are the Earthlings. These are the drivers. These are what drive life on our planet. But now I want to take you back a little bit to the south coast of South Africa, to a place called Mossel Bay. And recently some physical anthropologists were poking around this cave system that is high enough that it was above the sea level rise maxima. You know, sea levels have been going up and down quite a bit over the millennia, but this cave was above any of the washouts that could have occurred. And they found evidence of humans living in this cave 200,000 years ago, at a time when Africa was undergoing a natural climate shift, and the interior part was pretty much unlivable for humans. And the theory is that about 2,000 of us, we were Homo sapiens by then, moved to the coast and began living off, by, and in the ocean. And this would have been a time when the ocean actually saved us. And I'm going to get to the part about the ocean has to save us again today. But we lived under these conditions for 150,000 years. It's probably when we got so comfortable in the water swimming. It's probably when we began to pay attention to time and tides and the moon, because we would have to understand the tidal fluxes. The ocean taught us a lot. It fed us. It gave us the best brain food. It gave us omega-3 fatty acids, which would encourage the intellectual development of our young. It really became our source of life. And as you look around the world today, you can see evidence of this ancient history. Most any indigenous culture you look at that's near the ocean has a very intimate and functional relationship with it. The Amma pearl divers in the middle there are from Japan. They're always women, and we have history on them 2,000 years back. It probably goes much further. They breath hold dive down and collect food, they collect pearls, and any number of places here, and I'm sure many of you are comfortable in the water. We're the most adaptable animal that's ever existed on this planet. As a matter of fact, it was a scientist, this is me about 3 weeks ago in Micronesia. And again, that gentleman had just walked in along that reef flat with those shrimp in his hand, and it struck me that that is a scene that could have occurred hundreds of thousands of years ago, and it's still occurring today. So we are the only human that, as Haldane noted, that can run 20 miles, swim a mile, and climb a tree. So, the swimming and the diving is part of us. It's really part of us. So I have a new book. It just came out, and it's available out there, The Soul of the Sea and the Age of the Algorithm. And the first part of the book reviews the industrial relationship we've had with the ocean. And it's very interesting to track that over time. Whaling was the first globalized extractive ocean industry in the world. Back in the 1800s, whalers, mostly from New England, where I'm from, would sail all around the world, bringing back oil to light the streets of London, New York, and Boston. We then invent the advent of steam, the advent of petroleum, started to propel us around the planet. It helped us basically all of our migrations, and we began to dominate the planet through our mastery of the ocean and the technologies associated with the ocean. So the ocean fed us, the ocean transported us, the ocean really is many ways the organizing principle. Now, if you're interested in more details on the histories in the 18th, 19th centuries, you can read the book, but I want to compress the last 30 or 40 years for you right now, because I feel it's so important to know where we've come from and where we are in order to understand where we need to go. Now, if you look at the 1950s, I call that the militarization of the ocean. After World War II, we built more naval ships and submarines during that decade than we did during World War II. And it was all about the Cold War and fighting a war under the ice of the Arctic with nuclear submarines like this one. And if you go forward to the next decade, the 1960s, you'll find that that was the decade of my co-author and I, Nishan Dignarian, call it the decade of the awakening. It was the decade that Cousteau, after many tries over the centuries, some of them kind of comical, of us trying to get underwater. It was a dream that we probably began off the coast of South Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago, and we kept trying everything we possibly could. Many of you may be divers here. That's the famous Mark V dive rig that was in operation for over a century. And it wasn't until this young French lieutenant during the waning days of World War II figured out how to get compressed air out of a bottle, and that was Jacques Cousteau when he invented the two-stage regulator. And that changed everything. Suddenly we could go underwater as recreational individuals, we could go underwater as scientists, we could go underwater as filmmakers and bring it to the world. The 1980s was the period of state ownership of the oceans. That's when the law of the sea came into being, and states began to say, okay, we own this much of the ocean. It was mostly about ownership, not so much about what we're going to do with it. And the 1990s was the decade when the private industry began to engage and say, hey, we need the ocean for our supply chains, if you're a seafood retailer, and the Marine Stewardship Council was founded at that time. Now, when I describe these periods, the militarization, the awakening, the private sector involvement, states, it's not like one goes away. They all build on each other, and our relationship with the ocean continues to get more complex over time. Now, this is a bit of a tall glass of water to drink here, this figure, but I'd like you to just get a sense that on the left-hand side is the natural world. On the top, it's the land. On the bottom, it's the ocean. Prior to humans taking over the planet, which we have, went from 2,000 people to some 7 to 9 billion now. And the bottom is an illustration for the ocean. This is done by a colleague of mine, Doug McCauley. Thank you, Doug, for letting me use this. And you'll see that about center line is where we are, and to the right is the future. And I feel very optimistic about the future, especially if we take into consideration how we got to where we are, the various industrial relationships we had with the ocean, what were the mistakes we made, what were the unintended consequences. For example, in 1909, when plastic was first made, who would have guessed? I mean, it was such a great idea. It's this durable, inexpensive substance that replaced so many things in our world. And here we are over 100 years later, and it's all gotten away from us. We didn't pay attention that we needed to really keep track of it. Sailing technology. Imagine the first human, probably along the coast of Africa or maybe India, that stuck a stick on a log and put a woven mat up on it and noticed that the wind would push it, and if you put another stick in the water, you could direct where it went. Who would have guessed that that could lead to a small nation in the North Atlantic ruling the world through their mastery of nautical technology, the UK? Who could have guessed that 90% of all of our goods today are transported upon the water? Who could have guessed that it would have led to slavery? Who could have guessed that it could have led to the domination, the north-south divide that we still have in the world today? That mastery of that technology, that mastery of the ocean really was a determinant. And we did it unwittingly, unknowingly. We have an opportunity now as we go forward into the future, and the future has been called various things. The one that I like the best is the fourth industrial revolution. And that is the revolution we're undergoing now with big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. So that we don't end up doing this, which is kind of the trajectory that we're on now, and right where we are now is this. Now, the first thing you've got to realize in order to make any progress, in my opinion, is to accept that we humans have become part of the Earth system. We are part of the ecosystem of the Earth, okay? We're not going to be able to go back to an ocean of 1,000 years ago. Many people would like to. I wouldn't mind it myself, but it's unrealistic. So the first thing is to define ocean health as we are now a member of the reef, we're a member of the ecosystem, and a healthy ocean is defined as one that delivers a range of benefits to people now and into the future. I was honored to be part of the team that came up with something called the Ocean Health Index, and it's the first global, transparent, scientific measure of ocean health. And what you see here are all the data sets, the kinds of information that we had about the ocean, and people would narrow in on one or two of these. Well, what we did is we took them all and we integrated them into a metric, almost like the Dow Jones Industrial Average for the ocean, and this became the Ocean Health Index. But again, measured against the ability of that ocean to deliver benefits to humans now and into the future. We now need a new Ocean Health Index. We need an index that is much more detailed, one that's, think of an avatar for the ocean. Imagine if you go into your office in the morning, flick your computer on, and have a real-time view of the ocean so that you know where the yellowfin tuna are spawning, you know where the right whales are breeding, you know where the temperature inversions are occurring and an upwelling is about to occur. And then you can adjust human behavior and human activities to benefit from those activities, but also, more importantly, to make sure that we do not interfere with them, that we allow the ocean to continue to prosper. So now, here's why I call this our renaissance, our ocean renaissance. The guiding principle that the world used for the ocean was the Law of the Sea Convention, and that really was like the constitution of the oceans. It was pretty much adopted by almost every country in the world except the United States, and I think Iran maybe. We're very much outliers. And the Law of the Sea was all about ownership. It was like, okay, every country gets to claim 200 miles out from their coast. They own everything in the water column and they own everything on the sea floor. But that was about it. And since the Law of the Sea, which went into force 30-odd years ago, we didn't have any cohesive global plan on how to manage the oceans, and therefore how to manage and ensure our own future and existence. Except in 2015, we had 3 major agreements passed through the UN that nobody seems to have noticed. The UN Climate Agreement, highly specified oceans in the front matter. There's a high seas expansion. When the Law of the Sea was created, it basically did a pretty good job at what happens within 200 miles, but then the high seas, which is everything outside of 200 miles, and by the way, that's 60% of the ocean, was basically left as, well, we'll figure that out later. And we're finally figuring that out. And then the third item, which is of major import, was the Sustainable Development Goal 14, which is the ocean. So we had an alignment. We had a magic moment where the international policy bodies of the planet came together, and I would argue, thanks to the work of some filmmakers that I know here in the audience and other people, that the general public finally now get it, and we are ready to engage at this point. Another analysis we did in the book is this graph shows the percentage of sovereign national area that is ocean. And these are all the countries in the world. Now the blue are countries, that's ocean territory. So fully half the countries in the world have more ocean than they do land. And the ones at the very top have like 99% ocean. These are the small island countries in the Pacific, Indian, and Atlantic Oceans. And this is something we really need to look at, because all of our governance systems, many of our value systems, our maps, everything's geared towards the land. We need to reset our governance systems to adequately address ocean affairs. We need to really get out there, almost like the Lewis and Clark expedition, and see what's in the ocean, because we don't know. When I talk to leaders of countries that are mostly ocean, I ask them what's their major gap in knowledge, what do they need? And to the last one, they say, I need to know what's out there. And if you recall, those of you that are schooled in American history, it was when Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark out across the new area that he purchased from France. They made maps, they inventoried the animals, they identified 40 new Native American tribes, and their information became the framework for the United States Western expansion for the next 100 years or so. We need something like that for the ocean. So that's really where I wanted to take you today. I have a few more slides, but I'm going to stop in case there's a question or two. But I also, as I sort of think about this group, I would like to throw out a challenge to those in the energy sector, and that's let's get a robust, doable ocean energy agenda. Now, Carl put up some bullets yesterday: wind, tide, thermal differences. Those are all great. I'll throw another one out for you. What about hydrothermal vents? The seafloor is, in fact, I'll skip ahead to this one. The seafloor is covered in certain areas with these vents, and the hot water comes out of there about 600 degrees Celsius. And I would like to see if there's a way to put power stations down there. With that kind of a temperature delta, there must be a way to generate some pretty good energy from these. And we already have very good technologies for cables under the ocean. All your phone calls go through these cables. Why not develop an agenda for a hydrothermal vent electrical generation or something like that? So with that, I will thank you all for your time and attention, and I look forward to the rest of the conference.